Okay, so this is the YoyoFactory damage. This is Nate Dailey's signature yo-yo, and if you guys don't know him, he's a very chill and cool player. When you see him on stage, he shows a lot of energy and enthusiasm in performing, and his tricks are really clean and well executed. If you want to see more of this dude, I'll put a link to his Instagram down in the description and some of his routines to show you how cool this dude is. Which brings us to his signature yo-yo, the ND. The ND is basically the starting point and origins of Nate's other signature yo-yos, namely the Bind, the ND Ultra, and from one of those designs came the Damage. The Damage is what I presume to be the more floaty version of the Bind. In general, the Damage seems like its design was based on the Bind with the intention of making a more fun and enjoyable throw. Now don't get me wrong, the Bind is a great yo-yo, both in design and in playability, but sometimes it just feels quite jarring to play with, being heavy and competition oriented. So when YoyoFactory made the Damage, the general thought was to take the Bind and make it more fun. Now onto the yo-yo itself. Let's talk about the design of this throw, starting from the gap all the way to the rims and the cup of the yo-yo. The Damage has a fairly wide gap width, I'll show you that later on in the video, and the yo-yo has these Delrin rings at the walls of the yo-yo, and when it comes to walls, the less friction the string causes between it and the walls makes an effect on how stable a yo-yo could be. YoyoFactory incorporated the Delrin rings to cut down on friction and also giving it a side effect of a plasticky bind feeling. The way I can describe this is when you're using a plastic yo-yo and you bind, it feels like that, but once it returns to your hand, it feels like a metal yo-yo. Continuing to the shape, this is the signature shape of the ND. Like I said earlier, Nate's signature yo-yos are mostly based on this shape, so this is pretty much the same as the bind. It's a fairly curved shape with an inward curve and a straight rim, which makes this yo-yo very flared out and easy to catch. Now going into the cup, this is where the Damage gets its uniqueness. Now a little bit of background. You see, the bind had brass rings inside an aluminum housing which covered the rims, and since brass was denser than steel, this should theoretically make it spin more powerful than any conventional inner rim steel bimetal. And it did. However, this was a bit too heavy and powerful. So I guess YoyoFactory thought, I wonder what the bind would play like if it didn't have those brass rims inside. And then came the Damage. This yo-yo has hollow rims, and this gave the yo-yo a really floaty and echoey vibe to it. Now if you guys aren't familiar with this echoey vibe, yo-yos with a similar feel are the checkpoint pivot yo-yos, the Horizon 2, and the Bind. Now at the center of the cup has this really unique and somewhat odd design. The center has this like circle indent, and at first I thought this was a really awkward spot for finger spins and thought it would just fritz out when you attempt it. But later on in the video, you'll see that it's actually quite the opposite. Also at the center are some engravings and the name of the throw, as well as Nate's signature, and we're done. Now for the specs. Now for comparisons. We're gonna compare this boy to the YoyoFactory Bind and the YoyoFactory Flame. The Damage is basically the same shape and design with the Bind. The only main differences between the two is the cup having a circle indent instead of a subtle curve towards the center, the inner rims being thicker and hollow, and the Damage having Delrin walls instead of being just aluminum. And as for the Flame, they just have a similar concept of having Delrin walls, and that's pretty much it. Nothing else is really parallel between the two. Alright, moving from the physical features about this throw, how does this thing play? Okay, so I've had this throw for quite a while now. It's been almost 2 months since I first had this, and here are my thoughts on it. So my first impression on this throw was that it was gonna play like the checkpoint pivot. I thought it was gonna have that echoey vibe that I really like. I also expected this yo-yo to be easy to catch since it had a flared out shape, but what I was really thinking about this yo-yo the first time I saw it was this part of the design. I was really wondering why YoyoFactory thought of using this design. I thought it would hinder you from doing finger spins like I said earlier. I was also wondering how this yo-yo would do grinds when the gap of the yo-yo had Delrin rings. After a while though, I was really surprised. I was actually quite hesitant in trying finger spins because I thought the yo-yo just wouldn't work, but it did, tremendously. Well, given the fact that I have a long fingernail on my index finger, the indent on the Damage pretty much just sits snugly on the curve of my fingernail. So if your finger doesn't have a longer nail, you might have a difficult time doing finger spins. Other than that, this yo-yo is generally a floaty and echoey throw. It doesn't have the same echoey vibe as the checkpoint pivot, but it has its own type of feel. It mostly just feels fairly light and it's very easy to move. But honestly, it mostly just feels like a generic light throw, nothing too unique about how it feels. But moving on from all of that, what about its characteristics? binds on this thing are pretty good. It's not the best feeling, but it works fairly well, so I'll give it a good 7 out of 10. The gap width works fairly well and it doesn't snag very much. Keep in mind I use a very thick string, the Project 44 Mega 14S, and the binds work good enough. When the yo-yo I'm reviewing has snaggy binds, I tried different types of string and string thicknesses, like Kitty Fat, Kitty XL, and other thinner strings. But the Mega 14S works fairly well, and hasn't had many snags, so I'd say the binds on the damage worked fairly well enough. Nothing too spectacular, it just works fine. For regens, the damage gets a 6 out of 10. Regens aren't the best with this yo-yo. Well, pretty much any yo-yo with low walls and flared shapes are slightly more difficult to control when it comes to regens, but since the yo-yo doesn't have a difficult time letting go of the string, I'd say regens are just fine with this yo-yo. Like I said in the binds, nothing too spectacular, but it works just fine. Comfort-wise, this yo-yo is great. A solid 9 out of 10 for me. The shape really lends itself well when it goes back to your hand because of that sleek curve. Your throw hand finger has a really comfortable spot, and it just makes catching this yo-yo on your hand quite a pleasant feeling. Build quality is something that just came into my mind while making these reviews, because it's something that I notice gets overlooked sometimes, as well as durability. With that being said, the damage gets a good 9 out of 10 for build quality. This is a YoyoFactory throw. One thing that stays very consistently with their yo-yos is their quality control. They always deliver a consistent amount of quality in their products, and the quality on the damage is top tier. However, in terms of durability, this may be a slight problem. Remember that indent from the cup? Well, since it's such a straight cut on the axle of the yo-yo, a few heavy hits or dings on this throw could cause a bunch of problems. For example, a heavy enough hit could cause the yo-yo to vibe a lot, and if there's too much damage, that could lead to the yo-yo completely breaking apart and the axle ripping off the body of the yo-yo, which you do not want to happen, but that rarely happens, so it's not too much of a big deal. Another thing are these press-fitted aluminum rims. A hard enough hit and these things can pop off, which could lead to a few problems unless fixed immediately. So yeah, in terms of durability, this gets a 7 for me. I hope for the next run these rims will be more secure, and to the people who already own a damage, just, be careful. The finish of this throw is just straight up S tier. It's extremely smooth and is one of the smoothest grinding yo-yos I've had. Definitely a 10 out of 10 for me. Finger grinds, great. Talon grinds, amazing. Finger spins, surprisingly good. Even the engraving doesn't get in the way that much. So yeah, no critiques for the grinds on this yo-yo, it's simply amazing. For smoothness, since the throw has great build quality and quality control, smoothness is easily a 9 out of 10. The only reason I didn't give it a perfect rating of 10 is because the stock bearing this came with was really vibey. It felt like one of the ball bearings wasn't spinning properly, so I had to replace the bearing with another center track. But other than that, the damage spins pretty nicely and is quite fun to play with, so I'd say a 9 is good enough. Catchability is pretty good with this throw, which is why it gets a good 9 out of 10 from me. The yo-yo has a very nice flared out shape, which really helps when catching this yo-yo, but it isn't too wide that it catches multiple strings all at once. If you guys have seen Nate play with the ND, and he does a lot of extreme tricks and slacks, and you can see that he doesn't have a difficult time catching the ND, and since the ND and the damage have basically the same specs in terms of width, it's pretty much the same with catching this yo-yo. Now in terms of power, this thing is actually surprising. The rims are hollow, but it carries a significant amount of power despite how light and floaty this thing is. So yeah, very surprising. It isn't the most powerful yo-yo in the world, but it gets the job done. I'd give this yo-yo a solid 7 out of 10 for power. It carries out your tricks fairly easily even without throwing the yo-yo extremely hard, so I'd say that the power on this thing ain't so bad. Okay, so for momentum, it's pretty dang good. It works amazingly and carries that power very well, while also being able to move very easily. This thing moves so easily, but it's controllable. It's light, it's floaty, and it's powerful enough. So for momentum, this gets a solid 10 out of 10. As for speed, this is also pretty dang good. It's a light and a powerful enough yo-yo, and being light, it's really easy to move around. So going up to those speeds isn't even a problem with this throw. This yo-yo gets a solid 9 out of 10 from me. The only main reason it doesn't get a perfect rating is when you move this yo-yo too fast, it does lose a bit of that power fairly quickly. But other than that, it's a really good yo-yo to get up to speed. In terms of stability, it works alright for the most part, so it gets a 7 out of 10. There's been a solid problem with the ND yo-yos tilting its axis easily when you hit this part of the yo-yo. When you aren't focusing enough and you keep hitting this part of the yo-yo, it tilts very easily. My boy Brandon Vu has pointed out on his ND Ultra video that the yo-yo is quite unstable when you don't hit it perfectly in the center, and for the most part, he's right. These yo-yos have a problem when you land on the rims too frequently, but other than that, just keep away from the rims and it works fairly well, so a 7 seems good enough. When it comes to horizontal though, it ain't that bad. It works well enough, and since it's quite floaty, it isn't difficult to move this thing around. And since it has a good amount of power, doing your horizontal tricks on this thing is great. A solid 8 out of 10 in terms of horizontal tricks. Overall, I think this yo-yo is just awesome. For being a light and floaty yo-yo, it carries a good amount of power to it. And plus, this thing is really fun to use. And for that price point of 60 US dollars, it is a bit more expensive than the average 45 bucks, but for the performance this store brings to the table, I'd say this yo-yo is a great deal. Would I recommend this yo-yo? Absolutely I would. This thing is fun, it's light, it's powerful, and it's just an awesome yo-yo. It works just fine, but is it for competition? I'd say it could, but I think for how the yo-yo is built and how it performs, I think this is a more of a fun throw than a competition throw. But aside from that, if you guys want to buy one of these, there will be some buy links down in the description. And with that, thank you guys for watching. And if you enjoy any of my videos and want to see more content like this, be sure to click that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, click that like button. And if you guys have any questions or suggestions, leave a comment down below, and I will see you guys on the next video.